In part 9, we're going to talk about waste.
The next thing we looked at was waste. Waste is not in nature, it's just in human nature, at least the way that we currently live. And when you start looking at waste through a new set of lenses, what you realize is that all waste is just an opportunity to create additional yields or products or even revenue streams. In this picture, what you can see are all sorts of innovative ways for growing food, and every single one of those systems that we've got up here are utilizing waste products. So either waste products from the kitchen in the form of compost, or we've got this pita factory not far from our house which produces 5-gallon buckets, and they give them away to us for free endlessly. So we've created these global buckets, which are 2 5-gallon buckets nested together, and it's basically a low-tech, low-cost wicking bed. We've created upside down tomato planters. One of the ways that we've captured more growing space in our greenhouse is we actually grow tomatoes vertically downwards, and they're planted within these 5-gallon buckets. My favorite things to go and do with Rowan is go down back alleys and look at the trash that people throw out. I know it sounds terrible, but people throw out the most valuable things. And one of the things I find an absolute ton of are these Rubbermaid bins. And so we have captured a whole bunch of these Rubbermaid bins and turned them into gardens. Another thing that's indigenous to back alleys and waste piles in cities are cinder blocks. And cinder blocks make absolutely great little garden spaces that you can put into little nooks and crannies. And because they're made out of concrete, they store thermal energy, and they're great for growing things like nasturtium or little salad greens that you can put along the path towards your kitchen. So we love to find new ways of using waste and turning it into resource on our property. One of my most favorite things to do is to totally freak people out when they come over for dinner. So inside of our apartment, we have this little coffee table which has a tablecloth over top of it, and most people look at that and just say it's a nice little coffee table, or even some place where you could eat food while you were doing some other activity. And usually there's some nice books on top of it. And after dinner, what I do is I take people's plates and I take this tablecloth off of this coffee table, and underneath it is just writhing with worms. So it's actually a coffee table worm system all in one. And the worms love to eat the food scraps that we don't want to eat. And they turn it into worm castings or worm poop, which is absolutely loaded with microbiology, which ends up going straight back into the garden. This is a waste stream that nobody wants to talk about, and very few people are comfortable doing, but it's human waste. And right now, most human waste is dealt with in a conventional water toilet. So we're using potable water to push human waste, and which means that that clean potable water is turned into black water, and it gets sent to sewage treatment facilities. What's interesting about this is that in about 20 years from now, the world is literally going to run out of phosphorus. And phosphorus is one of the most important agricultural nutrients to grow plants. Phosphorus is the nutrient that's required to grow seed. And so whether you're growing tomatoes or wheat or any grain or seed for that matter, if you don't have phosphorus in the soil, you can't grow that plant. So we've got about 20 years of this mineral left. And in addition to that, our nitrogen, which is how we grow the green parts of our plant, comes from natural gas. Eventually that's going to run out. And our potassium is mined in the form of potash, which also has a limited supply, albeit it's quite a bit longer than phosphorus. And these minerals are finite, just like oil. So what happens is we go and extract them, we put them into the soil, we grow our food gets shipped to us, we eat it, and then we defecate into drinking water, and that mineral gets lost. That mineral either goes to the ocean or it gets bound up in biosolids, some of which go back onto farmland. If we don't start addressing our nutrient cycling issues as a species, this is going to bring civilization to an end. I know that sounds really extreme, but without nutrient in the soil, you can't grow plants, and without plants, we can't feed the world. So one of the things that will happen in the next 20 to 30 years is either some form of decentralized composting toilets or more advanced sewage treatment facilities that are going to do a better job of harvesting these minerals. One of the upsides of mineral harvesting or minerals themselves is that phosphorus or potassium or even nitrogen are elemental, which means they're just atoms. They're atoms that are floating around the earth, which is different than oil. Oil is a combination of atoms which creates this hydrocarbon, so hydrogen and carbon. When you burn oil, it's gone forever. You have to wait for another ice age or another mass extinction in order to replenish oil. So it's not available to us in human time, it's available to us in geological time, which is useless. But phosphorus and potassium and nitrogen, because they're elemental, can get cycled back into the system if systems are created properly. So one way that you can do this yourself in your own home or in your own homestead is by utilizing compost toilets. And so there are commercial compost toilets available that you can employ right now that will allow you to do this. And there's also low-tech systems that you can use, which are used in a lot of developing countries. And the system that I'm referring to is something called the Humanure toilet. And there's a great book written on the subject by a man named Joseph Jenkins called the Humanure Handbook. And if you're interested in this subject and it's something that you want to learn more about, I highly, highly recommend that book. One of the things that stops people from engaging composting toilets is that they get grossed out by the idea. And I've spent quite a bit of time in Australia, and in rural Australia, composting toilets are just the norm now. One of the reasons people don't like talking about composting toilets is they think about outhouses. But outhouses and composting toilets are two totally different beasts. I totally get how gross outhouses are. One of the reasons that outhouses are so disgusting is that we use them, and when we use them, we put human excrement into these holes without balancing it with carbon. And so you end up getting this massive material which is decomposing in an anaerobic way and creating all sorts of odors that none of us like to be around. If you have an outhouse and you want to deal with the odor problem, what you have to do is actually put 50% of the mass into the hole as carbon. So like wood chips is a really good example. When you go to places like Australia, though, where composting toilets are mandated in rural areas, what you'll find is that they always have a carbon source close to hand. And if you balance it out with carbon, it ends up smelling more like the wood chips than anything else. And what you'll find is that these composting toilets decompose the material very quickly and turn it back to soil, which can then go out back onto the landscape to feed a timber lot or some non-food producing system that will allow you to keep those nutrients in cycle on the property as long as possible.